everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week, we are coming at you with two brand new reviews for two brand new records. We are going to be talking about the latest album from Underscores, Hyperpop, dance pop, internet sensation. We are talking about their new album, You. We're also going to be talking about the latest album from Neurosis, their new record, An Undying Love for a Burning World. Let's start off today talking about Neurosis. Now, this is a classic episode of this show in the respect that we are currently covering the number one and number two highest rated albums on Rate Your Music this week, which is was
Yep.
always something we resorted to in the past when we didn't know what to review, or we just that was where we would look to in order to see what people were talking about online. And I feel very funny looking at these two records because they're very different kinds of albums, and yet I would say that each of them is very quintessentially us in different ways. And as for Neurosis, this is a pretty quintessentially me album. This is a very acclaimed and very storied band. But it's not just that they're an acclaimed metal band. They're an acclaimed metal band that I absolutely adore. I love Neurosis because I have had a long-standing love affair with the genre of music known as sludge metal. Riley kind of got really into one of the sort of big three tentpole sludge metal bands of modern sludge metal anyway, that being Cult of Luna, who we've actually covered on here in the past a couple of times and are just one of my absolute favorite bands in the entire world. And when I was sort of getting into their discography and exploring the realm of these subgenres, which are a bit nebulous because they're sludge metal, post metal, and there's some doom metal overlap. Some of these genres are a little bit incestuous. You don't have to think too hard about being super accurate with some of these labels. But in this scene, Neurosis, Cult of Luna, and bands like ISIS are kind of the biggest names in the genre. And Neurosis have been making incredible records since the day that they came onto the scene, really. They were very active in the early 90s, and their technical kind of label debut, Souls at Zero, is a classic. And ever since then, they have done nothing but drop seminal release after seminal release. These guys are as consistent as they come. Frankly, I would say that they are only rivaled by a band like Converge in terms of their consistency and their longevity. However, I got really into this band, and then immediately afterwards, there was some controversy. The previous frontman of Neurosis, one Mr. Scott Kelly, was outed as being kind of a not super cool dude. And it's not just that he wasn't a super cool dude, it seemed like there was some genuine bad blood between the band and him. And it made it increasingly difficult to work with this guy, and kind of shone a light on the fact that the most recent Neurosis album before this, Fires Within Fires, back in 2016, 10 years ago, was their weakest album in ever, if you ask me. Not a bad album by any means, but very much an album of a great band spinning their wheels. And so this kind of retroactively made a whole lot of sense. And once he was dismissed from the band, I think everybody just kind of they didn't announce a formal breakup or anything, but everyone was like, well, I guess Neurosis are calling it quits. Just because that's what happens to bands like this. And Scott Kelly is the main vocal presence and main guitarist of the band. So it's just, you kind of view him as an irreplaceable component of their sound. And to be fair, character notwithstanding, it kind of was. So I'm pretty sure that nobody was super upset, just because it's kind of difficult to complain about not getting more Neurosis music when, I mean, again, just look at the discography. Which is why, to my everlasting shock, recently we got the news that not only was this album dropping, that they had replaced Scott Kelly with not just a guy that they found. No, 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 no. It's not just any random dude. They, in fact, got Aaron Turner of ISIS, who is, as I mentioned, one of the other big post-metal acts in this scene. I don't believe they've been active for a long while, but getting this pull is like makes this borderline a supergroup at this point. And I can't tell you like I heard this news and was immediately like, this made me perk up. I was like, okay, not only
I
do they
was to
want to
say,
make
I
me,
can tell you the last time that this happened for you
hmm,
was the Cardiacs album that we talked about.
yes, and they got Mike Vennert of Ocean Size, and it was like, oh, you just pulled like another guy that I love to do the thing. Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. But in terms of like metal bands replacing core members, this historically has a disastrous precedent. Like, I can think of maybe one metal band that was big and got bigger and arguably better once they had a frontman change, and that's the Dillinger Escape Plan, and they had to do that twice. And they are very much on an island. So this I was like, okay, I'm excited, I'm interested, but I am approaching this with some extreme caution. Also, additionally, because ISIS as a band, the band, the band ISIS, like the
I have no
god.
idea. I have no idea what sort
I,
of precedent you're trying to set
yes,
right
I
now.
no, I just want people to make sure what I'm talking about when I say ISIS or when I praise ISIS or whatever, or say that I don't like their albums or whatever. Like, just know what I'm talking about here. That being said, that band, not my favorite post-metal group. I recognize they have a lot of classics. We actually were going to review one of their classic albums, Oceanic, back when it had an anniversary, and we elected not to just because my reaction to it was a little bit indifferent. But my problem with ISIS was never the front person. In fact, I kind of think that Aaron Turner was the reason that I latched onto the music that I did with that band. So now we have the ultimate question. Are Neurosis still Neurosis? And what is this new album even? And is it any good? I turned on this record a couple of days ago in my vehicle on a big sound system because if you don't listen to some sludge metal on some nice headphones or a big sound system, buddy, let me tell you, you're missing out. And that was how I wanted to do this. We got some modern production. We've got a producer on here who's doing lots of modern metal production for very left of the dial bands like Sumac, for instance. Lots of metal that is incorporating a lot of tribal aspects, which not unprecedented for Neurosis. The post metal, very well embodied earlier on in their career when they did collab albums with collaborators of people like Swans with their collaboration album with Jarbo. But now we have this record. And after I turned it on, I I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And when I say this, I mean that I've never heard a band have a comeback album that I think is quite this strong in almost every way you can categorize an album like this. I think from a production standpoint, from a writing standpoint, a performance standpoint, a compositional standpoint, this thing fucking blew me in half. I was absolutely dumbfounded when I turned this thing on and the first proper track, Mirror Deep, starts out with this incredibly strange, complex, mathy riff that just does this looping, repetitive thing. And I was like, wow, this does remind me of Swans. This makes me think of like To Be Kind and The Glowing Man. And then Aaron Turner comes on to this album, and this dude sounds better than he ever has. I got chills hearing this man put just the oomph in the front of his register with his absolutely blood-curdling screams and growls that are all across this thing. I have so much nice things to say about this record, but I have a history with this band, as I have established. They are one of my favorite bands in this scene. If I explore their discography in its entirety, I have no doubt Neurosis will be among my favorite metal bands in the future. So, Jen, I just kind of went, as I do often with music on this show now. So I have to ask, as somebody who did not have the context and was just like, this is just a new sludge metal album, how did that play to you? Because I think that there is a good chance that this could be many people's first exposure to Neurosis in general. So I think your perspective here is actually quite valuable.
So let me lead everybody in. As the metal layman of the two of us, this is another moment of Jake being like, here's an hour-long album from a band that has 30 years of history.
Yeah,
What do you think?
yeah.
And here's where I'm going to start. What I think is different about Neurosis and what I think makes this album stand out to me is the thematic focus that Neurosis has on environmental collapse and this recurring idea of throughout this album being one of the members of what feels like the last generation of civilization.
Yep.
And what goes on this record is then a kind of process of mourning for the last days, where so many of these songs, yes, have great moments of synchronicity in the riffs and in the vocal performances, but in just as many moments on this record, I found moments where I could just kind of zone out and appreciate the passage of time in the quieter moments of these songs in a way that I think is intentional. Because these songs, in a way that I don't think any metal album that you've had me talk about on this show, these songs have movements to them.
Hmm.
And it goes right back to Mirror Deep, the first proper track on this, where you have this very sharp first leg, but then this very contemplative, slow, and quiet second movement that leads into this groovy end leg that takes us into First Red Days, which goes into this kind of creation myth, death and rebirth, which renders the band's ideas about these grand moments of creation and destruction, not just in the lyrics, but in the dynamics of the music. Because by the time you get to the end of First Red Rays and you get to what's supposed to be the moment of rebirth, it's this ferocious wall of noise that comes after this long period of quiet, which is all a kind of abstract way of saying that the songwriting and the song construction of this album was the thing that kept me coming back. Because these guys are doing really ambitious things with the way that they construct these songs out of different periods of soundscape and where different senses of dynamism and different senses of vocal performance and tempo can say something narratively that uplift the overall concept of the record. And it's all very cohesive, which I found myself really impressed by, and that served as a really good anchor for me through the different sonic junctures that this would end up taking. Because I like that we get to this middle point of seething and scattered, where immediately after this kind of birth of the universe, we're getting this song all about manufactured separation and being disconnected from the sacred things. And it becomes a moment where you're right in the middle of the record. And so you're getting a little bit of and you could even say this about the Johnny Blue Skies record as well, where by the end, where it's just like, man, everything that's happening today in politics is insane, ain't it? But you've gotten so far into the sound of the album that the artistry is completely overtaking you in the moment where it gets its most preachy. feels completely earned by the time that you arrive at that juncture. And so by the time that we get to Seething and Scattered, I'm completely sold on it. And I like that it's a slower moment for the record in general, and I like the way that it's taking this more emotional, more grandiose portrayal of it than something like the Johnny Blue Skies record does, or even the Dreams of Being Dust did back last year.
Good
This
shout.
is an album that keeps the poeticism of the nature of a thing that even when you zoom out far enough, still feels like you're describing it in a way that's very online. Because even just the word disconnected
Hmm.
sparks this like, you're being ironic about the thing. But at a certain point, that this is where we're at. This is what we're reckoning with. This is what it's gonna become. Pour one out for Sora, because I was thinking about that while listening to this record today.
Biggest news story in our state currently in the last couple of days was a couple refusing to sell their $20 million property so that people couldn't buy data centers. So, amen, brothers and sisters. Keep fighting the good fight.
That too. Shout out to those people in Mason County who refused to sell $250,000 worth of land to an AI data center. Because what I think I'm really getting at by acknowledging this point on the record is that this has ended up giving me what's a lot of records, especially rock and metal adjacent records of the past year or so, have been giving me, which is this kind of like poking at the bear of full societal collapse. And this album, more so than any others that we've talked about in this vein, commits to the idea that we are in a death cycle, especially towards the last leg with In the Waiting Hours and Last Light, really commit to this idea that we are in this kind of dying world. And then commits to an optimism of being in the dying world and saying, you know what? We deserve a little bit more than being quietly snuffed out. The last light should be bright. And this album reflects that sentiment in spades. And so for me, coming in as the layman, that's the way I kind of want to sandwich my whole review of this record, is that for me, coming in as the layman, the sentiment of the record feels very unique, even in comparison with all the stuff that we've been talking about throughout my kind of whole process of you just being like, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one of the like metal bona fides coming back with a new kick and a new movement forward for the scene. What I've been kind of holding on to is what they've actually been trying to say with all of that.
Yeah.
And an undying love for a burning world made me believe in the phrase that makes its title.
I really couldn't have put that better myself, honestly. I think that it's also just it's very refreshing to me as a metal fan because like that's kind of like primarily if you had to classify yourself as like a specific musical subtype, the way I would classify myself is that I am first and foremost a metalhead before I am anything else. And seeing an album like this being acclaimed and held aloft and even talked about right now is not that it's surprising, but it is, in a way, very affirming because metal bands like this are not modern. They're not contemporary. They were very relegated to a time and place. And, you listen to an album like this hour-long kind of post-metal record, and it doesn't like capture the zeitgeist in the way that popular metal albums that manage to still become popular do right now. So it's very affirming to see people kind of rally around this the way that they are, and like it being the result of the joining of Neurosis and ISIS is certainly has something to do with that. But it kind of feels like the stars all aligned for this to be something bigger. Like after the departure of Kelly, making a new album without your frontman, these guys have got to want to prove themselves. It's been a decade since the last album, and you could kind of feel them getting tired on the record before. You could kind of feel them, they didn't really seem like they wanted to push themselves much. And I don't begrudge them that at all. They've been in this scene for so long and have been such tireless innovators that they deserve to rest on their laurels a little bit. Like, they would be able to deserve to rest on their laurels if their career was half of the records that they've come out with, let alone the actual discography. So seeing this has been like kind of cool. And it's not like metal or even extreme metal of this variety is a stranger to talking about topics like this. I think about things like the heavier King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard albums that have been very well received by online circles that are overtly about climate change, like on albums like Infest the Rat's Nest, which is a concept album about the world catching on fire and everyone dying. And Petrodragonic Apocalypse is more or less kind of the same thing, but with like a stoner prog metal thing. And there's also bands like Gojira. Every single Gojira album is about climate change. Every single one of them. Like you can just go back, you look at the lyrics and be like, oh, okay, yeah, like even the one where they go out into space, they're going out into space because they're leaving a world that is, on fire. So, Neurosis, not a stranger to this at all, but combining it with the sort of production that they're doing this with, they make this album feel like my favorite subtype of sludge metal, and that's when they lean into psychedelia really strongly. And lots of bands like this, they're a very no frills kind of thing. Like old school bands, they're very, guitar, bass, drums, like no fancy shit, no electronic, accents, none of the stuff that isn't strictly analog. But Neurosis have modernized their sound in a way that I feel like is perfect. These mixes are gorgeous. These drums sound like they are trying to shake tectonic plates. Like there are so many moments on here where I just did my favorite like activity of listening to a new metal album is when something is just so fucking sick and so fucking wicked sounding that it just makes me pull the oh oh. And man, I did this constantly on here. The riffs on this are delectable. They are huge and they're groovy. I love when metal bands lay into groove, especially when you're combining it with the psychedelia, because it really lets you go with the momentum of the record. And I think this record has an astonishing amount of momentum considering the kind of album that it even is. Like there are songs like Mirror Deep and Untethered, which are much more on the shorter side, but they lean into a kind of post-hardcore aspect to this band's sound that they have always had. It was really more of a present element on their earlier stuff, but it allows for like really direct, really hard-hitting moments that I feel like can capture people a little bit easier. Like Untethered, for example, is kind of a really great example of like if you wanted to know what Neurosis are like or what this band or what bands like this are like, I would tell you to go and listen to that because it is 5 minutes, it's still robust, but it is one of the more like active and just sort of like bustling songs that they've got on here that has just so much point and counterpoint to it that it feels super dynamic. And like the dynamism of the structure of so many of these songs, like First Red Rays, Seething and Scattered, In the Waiting Hours, Last Light, like you said, these are songs with movements. They progress. There are long stretches of some of these songs that are just psychedelic ambience. And again, as a guy who was weaned on prog, psychedelic rock, and shit like Francis the Mute by the Mars Volta, I eat this shit up. Combined with the fact that, man, Aaron Turner, oh God, he's just a beast
Incredible.
on this album.
Incredible on this.
And I mean, like, he's on the older side, but he's just one of those dudes who's never lost a step. And I love being able to hear him in this context because their sound is very different from ISIS. They lean way more into the post metal than I think any of these other bands tend to. So the strengths here are a little bit more foundational, but it means that the moments where they get a little bit more ambitious with the sound really do feel super rewarding. Like on Seething and Scattered, I love how this song, like, it does have a lot of the contemporary ideas within, but it's also contextualized by sort of describing this great river eroding from the earth and just sort of like this terrible ecological collapse of this beautiful thing. And the way that it's described, it's like metal albums like this, not even just from the scene, I mean just like metal albums made from bands who are on like the older side and maybe they're not contemporary in their genre influences. Sometimes when you listen to the lyrics, it's like, this is very metal album type beat-ish lyrics. Like, you know what I mean? You can come to these
Yeah.
albums sometimes and it's like, yeah, this kind of sounds like we're doing stuff that we've been doing since the 80s, and it doesn't sound like the writing has much of a sharpened or refined point or thematic angle. But I cannot accuse this album of having such a weakness when it is so focused. Like, overall, the descriptions of collapse on this album, they have this quality to them where they spiral outward, echoing the structures of the songs, but it feels like the planetary climate collapse swallows the universe and not just the planet that it resides within. And they go for a lot of imagery that is a little bit more dynamic than you might expect because, I mean, for fuck's sake, this is a band with an album called A Sun That Never Sets. And you see the album cover and it's like, we're going to have a lot of warm, sort of like desert and like fire, maybe volcanic imagery, but they oscillate and kind of show the breadth of climate change and talk about things like, being trapped corpses in the snow as you're buried underneath the sheets of ice. And like again, they bring a lot more to the table when it comes to the visions of the apocalypse that they're painting here. But there is a hopeful bent. Like a lot of the album is about mankind's hubris, just our complete inability to face our own mistakes. It's not just man bad, so man pollute and earth cry. It's we have dug ourselves into a grave and we are unwilling to look reality in the face anymore, and it is going to have consequences. And just because we don't feel the breadth of them now doesn't mean we won't later. But the hopeful bent that they do have on songs like Last Light is so weirdly affirming in that not only do the people who have fought for this deserve to continue, but you pursue the last light because it's in our programming. It's what we have to fight for. We don't have a choice other than to pursue our final hope. The possibility that we can somehow heal ourselves and be saved. It's very emotionally rich as in a way that I didn't see coming and frankly did kind of move me. I felt quite affected by a lot of the material on here. And not to mention, you're coding this with just some of the best tunes and compositions this band have ever made. Last Light is this 17-minute long behemoth where the center of it is mostly just weird synthesizer atmospherics that let you marinate in where the song is going. Same thing with In the Waiting Hours and First Red Rays, which just, oh my God, this song, oh, holy shit. I don't have words for what this song manages to accomplish with the sonic palette of this album. It feels like every idea contained on this record is just jam-packed into this 8-minute long titan of a song where you get everything that you could possibly want from the many facets of Neurosis's sound. This was such a blindsiding experience in the best possible of ways. Not only did this album exceed my expectations, it's like the ideal version of itself. You picture, ISIS, Neurosis collaboration thing, and you're like, it's never gonna live up to what I expect in my head. And frankly, it demolished my expectations. I was still like, Neurosis haven't been on the decline, but maybe they won't find the chemistry again. Maybe the alchemy just won't be there. And now I'm like, this is an amazing swan song if they stop, which we don't know. Like, they could keep going. Metal bands getting long in the tooth, but still managing to make these acclaimed records. Like, fuck, Judas Priest's last, like, 3 albums have been great. Those guys have been making music for 5 decades. This is good. I love that this is an album that is getting so much attention, that is getting the spotlight because it deserves it and because it will get more people into metal. More people are going to listen to the Neurosis discography because of this. More people are probably going to check out bands like Isis and Cult of Luna, and that is a big plus for me. This has been affirming on like a sociological music strata level, but also just, oh, I love listening to this. Like, it's just one of the albums this year that I've listened to. And the moment it was over, I was like, oh, I can't wait to start this again. It has the juice. It gives me that enthusiasm that, like, I don't think an album like this has been this good in this scene since like the most recent Panopticon album that actually did delve into like post metal. And I would actually put this a little bit above that record just because I think that it's flexing a little bit more. It's doing a little bit more with its dynamics. And meaning that like I think that this is up there with like Panopticon's and Again Into the Light in terms of atmospheric sort of black and sludge metal of this decade. Like this is going to be a highlight for a lot of people, and frankly it's going to be a highlight for me. You could credibly make the argument, I feel, that this is Neurosis's best album. And in fact, I'm downloading their whole discography right now on Soulseek so that I can listen to all of it and definitively come down on one, because my previous favorite Neurosis album, A Sun That Never Sets, I like about as much as I like this album. So this was the best kind of surprise for me. I adored this album.
Big, big thumbs up for Neurosis because I also had a really great time with this.
Absolutely. Please go check this out, even if you're not a huge metal person or even like an atmospheric sludge metal, post metal kind of person, because if anything can convert you, something modern and contemporary sounding like this does not come along as often as albums like this maybe should to get people into it. So don't pass this up.
Before we transition, I have a special announcement.
Hmm.
Shout out to
Oh, oh.
New Style Records in Elizabethtown, Kentucky,
Yes.
who I got a copy of Mutiny After Midnight from. Shout out to ZZ and the guys over at New Style Records in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. I was just over there completely randomly on a trip to do some birthday shopping with my wife,
Sick.
and they happened to ask if they had a copy of the new Johnny Blue Skies. And so we just got talking and shooting the shit about music for a whole long time. And I bought a copy of the record, and I just wanted to shout those guys out. Love them. If you're near Elizabethtown, check them out. Really special business, really special place. They've got a bookstore right next to it. So if you're
Ooh.
not into records, go check out the bookstore right next door.
Go check them out. And also, congratulations, Sturgill Simpson, for being the first album since Taylor Swift's Folklore to make it onto the top 10 through vinyl sales alone. Fuck yes. Kentucky wins again.
Crazy arc for this album because we were talking about it on
We
the
were
episode last
legitimately
week like it
worried.
was a we were talking about it like it was a doomed prospect.
I mean, it felt like it. And now all of the sudden, Sturgill Simpson's fan base is just like, not on my fucking watch, motherfucker. And hey, let's do it. And pivoting from country music back into the hyperpop dance scene, let's talk about underscores real quick. And honestly, I kind of skipped over Wall Socket when it came out just because that was in our limbo period for the podcast, and it just like I saw everyone get into that album and I was too busy listening to Nebraska 17 times over, and so I did not get to listen to it. So I went into this album as a completely unchristened underscores person, but I have a feeling that that was not the case with you. And after at least one listen to this album, I feel like you could tell this is a Gen Ass Gen album. So, like, what were your expectations for this going in?
So okay, I actually hadn't listened to any of Underscores before
Hmm.
this, but we were both introduced to Underscores off of the last Danny Brown record,
Yes.
Stardust, I'm sure, then. So an interesting thing has kind of happened where for Underscores, young up and upcoming hyperpop digicore musician. I was reading a profile of her earlier today while listening to this record. The writer is very much trying to cast this album You as Underscores' like brat moment where
Mm.
even though this is a person doing something so weird, it's just too good to not be an overnight sensation and hyper chart success. And like, I'm not gonna say that it's not in the cards, but I'm not really out here looking for that anyway.
I don't think a lot of people are.
So what I will say about Underscores in this album You is that I love that after talking about so much hyperpop and dance music that feels so forward looking, that I can look at an album like this and draw this kind of web between all of the little pockets of musical inspiration that
Yeah.
very clearly drive all of this forward. Because, I mean, we talked a lot about house music when we reviewed the BPM, but this Underscores record feels like an amalgam of so many like Jen and Jake core musical elements that I've just loved unpacking because Underscores is a person who has just as much fondness for pushing the boundaries of what music can do with digital production as she does for Y2K era Christian rock radio,
That
which she
lyrical
even
moment
shouts
was
out
wild.
when she even shouts out at a moment towards the end of this record where I'm like, oh, wait a second. Going back and listening to these tracks, this does sound like a mid-aughts Christian rock record with a bunch of digital embellishment over it, and obviously a lot of thematic focus that gets it way more toward the like
Jane Remover
digi.
covering Switchfoot core.
The, oh my God.
I
So
I literally did think that at points, honestly. So you're not off base at all.
the nice thing about this one, though, is that this is a digicore breakup album. Like front
Mm.
to back,
Hmm.
this is a breakup record. And I love that conceit for an album that's kind of come out of this period of digicore that's very in keeping with, yeah, the Jane Remover album, the last 100 Gex record,
Hmm.
stuff like that, where it's like we're really pushing forward in terms of making this feel like pop music, but not really bend to any of the rules of pop song construction and lean way more on the EDM side of hyperpop, where we're getting like, the first song on this, Tell Me You Want It, which feels like this slow incubation and gestation until you get into this perfect chorus that I've had stuck in my
Mm.
head all day of just like that, tell me you want it, tell me you want it. Like
It's
that's that little
great.
nugget right there has been just kind of bouncing around in my head all day long. And the whole album kind of follows from that conceit where there's so many moments of wild exploration of the meaning of this relationship that culminates in these perfect climactic syntheses of the various points that these songs are trying to make that turns into these perfect pop hooks like
Mm.
on the last two tracks Body Feeling and Wish You Well, which those are the ones that feel most in keeping with like the last decade or so of
Yeah.
pop music. Like I saw somebody level a 1975 comp at Body Feeling in specific, and I'm just like, oh yeah, no, this is
Yeah.
Underscores is somebody else. That's what Body Feeling
Mm.
is
Yeah. Yeah, I completely see it.
in terms of the song construction. There's so many moments on this that don't just ring of the like Christian rock, and there's the piece, which feels like it's taking this perfect country song
Mm.
conceit of it's all the cigarettes that I shared with with this person that I love so much, and now I'm just left with the pack.
The
But
most Zoomer song conceit of all time. I kind of love it.
well, yeah, it's like a song about sharing cigarettes, but because it's by a person who's a few months younger than I am, it's about like hitting a weed pen or something.
Yeah. Gotta hit the vape.
And it's like, it tastes like vanilla. And I'm like, oh, this is a song about hitting the vape with somebody. But you miss the vape. If you miss the person, you miss the vape. I guess you do. And it's this perfect evolution of like a classic country song conceit. And I even think it goes so far as to getting to like a top picks for you level of it's like you don't even know how to get the thing that that person had that felt like such a natural part of them because of the like modernity and the micro brands and the changes in the consumer trends.
I completely get it. You're just finding a different way to explain why you have a chemical dependency on a person and not a chemical dependency on a thing. It's like it's actually a really elegant song conceit, all things considered.
And so I guess what was your go in? Because I mean, we've been loving the dance music, but
Hmm.
this is much more my speed and more toward the Jane Remover than the Sudan archives. So what's the hook
Yeah.
for you?
I I kind of went in just sort of like I have like a vague idea of what I think this is supposed to be. And after listening to it, I was more or less correct in my assumptions, but I did go in slightly apprehensively just because, a newer, more contemporary act, sometimes those can hit with me, sometimes they might not. In fact, like we're talking about sort of like people connecting it to like Brat and such. I wasn't really into Brat all that much. So anything that's kind of like adjacent to that or taking from it, I'm a little not, suspicious. I'm just like, how is this going to end up hitting for me? And funnily enough, it's not that it reminded me of like the sound of Brat all that much. It actually reminded me of really more the songwriting on that album, which honestly are the parts of it that I found the most compelling. Like not the parts where she kind of leans into pop star kayfabe, but the more emotionally earnest stuff that's on there, or even the stuff on like How I'm Feeling Now, for instance, because the way I kind of perceived this is that I got through like the first two songs, and the first two songs are a great way to start the album. They are total barn burners, like super duper fun. Like music in particular is just an absolute banner pop tune. But I heard it and I was like, okay, I like these. These are fun. But is this kind of gonna be the limit of what this project is? Like, is it just gonna kind of stay in its own lane and be kind of like a Jane Remover type of thing? Like, is this going to carve out its own space for me? And honestly, the more I paid attention to the songwriting, the more I was like, yeah, actually this does because the sort of breakup concept, hi Stevie, the sort of breakup concept of this is paired with the fact that it does feel like the songs, like the sequencing on here, I think is actually like super key to understanding the thematic core of the album because it's like this person is gradually shedding new layers of subterfuge that they hide behind because of what's occurred and they get more and more vulnerable the deeper you get into the track list. And so you kind of experience this sort of slow electro pop ego death that is a really fascinating ride. And it's also like, it's so well paced. Like, it's a short record, but it's also an album that just, it moves through its phases very quickly, but it does give everything enough time for you to sort of marinate and just understand what it's doing. Like, I got to Hollywood Forever and I was like, okay, this is the point at which the album is going to either stick in its lane or start to switch things up after this song. Because Hollywood Forever is this song about like, it's a little bit more macro than everything else on the record is, and it's sort of like idealizing this sort of vision of Hollywood so much so that you want your legacy to be that you're buried there so that you can persist there and feel some attachment to some kind of permanence just because everything on this album is so fleeting. It is so very much like emotions just constantly blindside the person at the core of this record. And as we go through these song conceits, we just sort of see them unfold themselves in front of you in a way that I think is actually quite vulnerable and revealing and fascinating, but it never ever makes the music slow down or less compelling by association, which can often like, I love when an album has a concept or just sort of a lyrical conceit like this, but oftentimes you can kind of burrow yourself into your limitations and just end up being a little bit repetitive. I don't think this album runs into that problem at all. If anything, it switches everything up so much, not only in what it's talking about and the level at which it talks about, like we get a lot more introspective the further we go. Like after Hollywood Forever, in fact, every song on here I would say is to some extent very introspective. But we're also getting stuff where I'm seeing like the actual sonic palette of this album sort of transform and shift in interesting ways that doesn't make the sort of again gradual unfolding that I described feel like it makes this album predictable. Because you have a moment in the middle like Innuendo, which is this rhythmic apocalypse of hyperpop that I just love. Like the actual beat in this song, oh, delicious, delectable, as good as anything that's on that Jane Remover album from last year that was so excellent. And I wouldn't be surprised if this album occupies a similar space this year that that album did last year, because the Jane Remover album last year was really more about finding your artistic voice and sort of embracing yourself. Whereas this kind of feels like not a rejection of the self, but sort of an embrace of evolution. This is an album about evolving out of your own sadness. And it's a really great idea for a dance record because what makes you feel more free than dancing? So if you actually go with it and like let the album carry you in the way that it intends to, I feel like there's so much synchronicity with the design of the album. It's kind of impossible not to enjoy. Like, if this is a sound that gels with you, I think this is about as good of an execution of it as I've heard these days. So, like, if it's something that sounds interesting, I have trouble fathoming the person who's into music like this who doesn't get something distinct out of this record, which can kind of feel like this is a scene that's very, like, it runs the risk of being oversaturated right now. But everybody is doing such a good job of carving out their own voice that I have yet to encounter the album where I'm like, maybe I'm getting a little tired of this. Like, nah, everybody is putting their best foot forward and designing these albums very, very smartly. There's no overwhelming moments in a bad way anyway. There's no moments on here where it loses itself. And I just appreciate how aerodynamic some of these releases are. They feel like they are designed to be consumed in a way that makes sense in the themes and the music feel like they go together in ways that dance music struggles to sort of reach for oftentimes.
It accomplishes this also by reaching for different kind of aesthetic goals from different
Hmm.
aesthetic inspirations. Like I'm thinking about the song Do It, which leans
Yeah.
into this very like early 2000s, like I would almost compare it to like early Justin Timberlake,
Hmm.
Britney Spears type stuff in terms of
Hyperpop
the
Timbaland. That's what
yeah,
this
it's
sounds
kind of
like.
hyperpop Timbaland where it's leaning into this a little bit more R&B, a little bit more bebop tinged vocal delivery and meter to it. That makes it feel very different. And then you get to like body feeling and even going back to Tell Me You Want It, it's got this more synthy pop deep hooks that feels more indebted to bands like Muna and bands like 1975.
Hmm.
Like Tell Me You Want It just sounds like that hook sounds like a Muna song, but
Yeah, it
in the
really
best
does.
way possible. Where I like when they can just like stand really firmly on a hook and deliver it. And Underscores is leaning a lot more on her singing on this record than she does in her
Yeah,
previous two. There's a lot less vocal manipulation and a lot more of just like her putting her full chest into it.
and it's a
And she
great
sounds
voice.
great. She sounds great on all this. And I think
Yeah.
that's part of where the Christian rock influences come from as well. Like really leaning into the, and even, on the fucking song on the Danny Brown album, she's doing that whole bit where she's like rap star, pop star, rap star. And she's leaning into this desire to be multifaceted on this,
Hmm.
which I really, really enjoy unfurling and, getting to make heads or tails of how good she is at any of it. But the fact is that she's good at all of it, or at least she's good at all of what makes its way onto the
She's
record.
a one woman machine. Like this album is like it's self-produced, self-mastered, mixed, performed like this she literally can do all of it. Like I was dumbfounded when I was like, who like produced this? Because it sounds expensive, frankly. And then I looked up and I was like, oh, she's everything on here. Oh, wow. That's insane. We have created an environment that people in underground scenes, and particularly artists who are like queer and trans and all that stuff, they have had to spend so much time getting better at what they do in pockets so far away from what commercial music is that they have just become these unbelievable sentinels of talent. They have forged themselves in fires that they had to kindle themselves. And now that people are actually discovering their music, they're like, oh, Jesus, these are like some of the most talented people alive. And I like genuinely believe that because to make an album like this, you, in under normal circumstances, you're going to need like a team of at least 10 people. Like you need engineers, you need mixers, you need somebody to master it, you need somebody to perform it, you might want somebody to feature on it, play an instrument, come in and do some outside production work. No, it's all one
There's no
person.
features on this.
No, platinum, no features.
Well, it's like, and I would have said that about the Jane Remover album last year. It just
Mhm.
had that one Danny Brown verse, but other than that, it's all her. And the same applies to this. And I completely co-sign and endorse what you're saying of like this little scene is propagated with people who have just spent so much time listening to people who make music because that's all they know how to do to express themselves and get something out. And I've been thinking so much about like people in my local scene here at Louisville. Like, shout out to everybody. Shout out to Buy Perfect and everybody behind the password, a pretty underground electronic music party scene here in Louisville that has been ballooning recently. But shout out to them and shout out to this record because it reflects, look, it all comes back to ballroom culture at the end of the day. I was talking to somebody recently who had never heard of like Paris is Burning before. And
Ah,
I was just like, yeah, this is where you see people who don't have anything left but what they bring to that artistic space. I feel like there's something to hyperpop and queer music spaces as an extension of ballroom culture, where now that like the local and the physical has been de-emphasized in the digital age,
yes.
we're looking to make these kind of weird hybridizations online of like, yeah, it's here and it's on the internet and everybody can see it, but it's art and don't fucking forget it because that's the sentiment that carries things forward like this and like the password again, shout out to them. And I just think it's beautiful. And I think the idea of the singular creative on a project like this really emphasizes that of like this is what you get when somebody puts everything they have into making something.
I think that ballroom culture is sort of the common ancestor here. And if I can link it to another phase, I think that this is the revival of what was in the 90s the UK new rave scene. Because, like, think about the music and the scene that that was propagated within, and like the underground culture that was born because of it. That was only limited by the fact that music distribution was not as easy in the 90s as it is now. So you have that sort of barrier for entry that's completely gone now. And you have all of these tools at people's disposal, people who can make music who were never able to make it in the past. I feel like ballroom culture did sort of evolve into the new rave scene because that was this sort of like heavily punk, queer, underground space that just sort of let this specific kind of dance music really evolve and thrive, but it was relegated to its sort of specific scene and place and time because of just the moment in which it was born in. And now that we have the shackles let loose, we're seeing it on a grander scale. It's not relegated to a region anymore or anything. Like it feels like to me, if you made a movie like Train Spotting today, Train Spotting soundtrack, a modern Train Spotting, would be filled with Jane Remover songs. It would be filled with underscores. It would be filled with songs that are on that Danny Brown album we reviewed last year. Like whatever, or like if a Gregor Rocky movie came out that was like trying to capture this sort of scene, that's what it would be soundtracked by. And like 100 Gex and like all of that stuff. So And it is nice to see that like, I've been covering music on this channel for 6 years now. And I've seen a lot of promising acts and movements like not fall by the wayside, but like when I was listening to stuff like this, I inevitably come back to things like Black Dresses, who were like a really big fixture of the like late 2010s and early sort of 2020s online music stuff of just like, trans musicians and the way that they sort of like released all of their stuff and the sounds that they dabbled in on albums like Love and Affection for Stupid Little Bitches, which is, I mean, frankly, all over this album. So, and seeing them like dissipate and them not making music anymore has always, that always made me a little bit sad. And seeing the spirit still live on is so reassuring because like it feels as though scenes like for example the windmill scene feels a lot smaller than it used to be a couple of years ago, and like I kind of wanted that to keep evolving. I kind of wanted that to see what that would grow into, and I kind of think it's a shame that it's not as buzzworthy as it used to be, even though I complained a lot about not understanding windmill scene bands. But I just wanted to see the evolution. So seeing this strain persist and like persist strongly because everybody's really loving this album, it's very reassuring. I love how widespread the queer music scene is now because it does have a sound. You're right, it has a sound and it has an attitude and there is a punk rock spirit to it that I think is super admirable. And it also paves the way for really personal projects like this. And I do think this is a very personal project. It's just kind of beneath the veneer of what this stuff kind of normally sounds like. But I think it does enough new and interesting things. Like the way that it sort of incorporates like guitars on here, like consistently made me be like, ooh, oh, okay. Like again, it did give me that sort
Yeah.
of like switchfoot sort of like, oh, okay, I'm gonna fuck with this. It's like it is kind of laser focused, designed on people with our specific background of people who listened to Christian music growing up, but listened to nothing but like queer rave shit now. So I enjoyed this a lot more than I expected to, and I'm very, very glad that was the case. Not that I, don't always enjoy stuff like this. I typically do, but I was always worried it would just get old or that it would, stop pushing. But not yet. No, like it's not relegated to just last year. We're going on. We're going forward, and it's looking good.
Absolutely. So, big thumbs up for Underscores. Very happy to be shouting out another album like this on the show.
Phenomenal week. Phenomenal
Not
week
just
for
for
releases.
reason of like it's in our usual wheelhouse, but because this was getting like hype on Friday when it
Hmm.
dropped. So we were like, yeah, we have to do the Underscores.
There's just so much that has been dropping lately. I know the Deer Hunter dropped an album recently that I have yet to get to. Poison the Well, Metalcore Stalwarts have dropped their first album in a while. Like it's music is
We're having
music
a
is
good
alive.
year.
It's a really good year.
Not
Like
to
I
say that
remember
at
when
the
we
end
were
of
like,
March, but I
maybe we'll get
mean,
something in like April, like in like 2022, where we were like, maybe something will come out. But I'm spoiled for choice this year. Keep it coming.
freaking BTS is back, man. It's only March.
BTS is back. Oh. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell us in the comments below what you think about these albums or any albums that have been released recently so that we can cover them. I'm not sure what's coming out in the immediate future, so we may have to take a little bit of a look backward just going forward because wow, there's so much stuff. But regardless, tell us all about it in the comments below. And as always, everybody, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Levi's. Quality never goes out of style. I don't technically think that's true. That
Quality never goes out of style.
That's a bit too generic.
That
Shit.
implies that, the major movements of the culture are always going to be of substantive quality.
Is that woke? Is that are Levi's trying to be woke? Many thoughts. Hmm. Woke is back, baby.